Now,
Trade Minister Dan Tehan would be the hardest working politician in Australia, many would say. But he's made time for us today. Welcome to the program, Minister Tehan.
Great to be with you, and the idea of a beer on a Friday afternoon in a beer garden sounds pretty good, doesn't it?
well, yes, the weather's holding up, so fingers crossed we can get out there by the time we're off air. But I want to ask you about Australia calling out Chinese coercion in a statement to the World Trade Organisation. This was a strongly worded statement, Minister. Will it antagonise the very easily antagonised China?
Well, this is part of the trade policy review process that the World Trade Organisation goes through with China every 2 years. Other countries go through a similar process, some every 2, some every 4 years. And it's about transparency. And so what Australia has done in its statement has pointed to all the benefits that have accrued globally from China being a member of the World Trade Organisation and the benefits that have accrued to China itself. But also, we've also pointed out that some of the practices that we've seen over the last 18 months seem to have a political motivation to them and have hurt our exports. And that's not how we want countries playing or basically conducting themselves when it comes to the World Trade Organisation, because that puts the very rules that we all are bound by at risk.
Minister, China is our biggest customer, and in business there is a saying that the customer is always right. Do you accept any responsibility for the toxic relationship that exists between the Australian government and Australia and its biggest customer?
Look, we've always made very clear that we want constructive engagement with China. In January, a couple of weeks after I became Trade Minister, I wrote to my counterpart, who was appointed at the same time I was, within about a 24-hour period, and I set out all the ways that we could engage and how I would like to be able to have a ministerial dialogue, work on our differences, but also look at the areas where we could constructively cooperate. Now, I'm yet to have a response to that letter. I'm happy to wait patiently for that response. Obviously, when you look at the current situation, for example, in China, where they're having trouble accessing energy, Australian coal was being provided to China and helping them be able, to deal with their energy demands. Now they've got energy problems. Our coal is there, and if China wants it back, we're willing to ship it to them again, and that would benefit China and consumers in China, and also would benefit emissions, because our coal is obviously a lot cleaner than the other sources of coal they're now turning to.
Now, I want to ask about the issue of international tourists. We've now had Victoria join New South Wales and say they're going to do away with quarantine from November 1 for those who are double vaccinated. What are we doing on that front? When can we expect to see tourist numbers surge again? And will we have a list of countries where tourists can come from, or is anyone who's double vaccinated welcome in Australia?
Well, great news today with the announcement by the PM that we're going to have a travel lane or a travel bubble open with Singapore in the next couple of weeks. So we're beginning that process, and we're very hopeful that we'll start to see international tourists, double-vaxxed international tourists, returning, especially to New South Wales and Victoria without quarantine before Christmas. We're beginning the process, obviously returning Australians a first cab off the rank, but then we want to move to international students, working holiday visa holders, those who will help us with our agricultural workforce shortages, and international tourists. And my hope is we're going to see that, especially when it comes to New South Wales, Victoria, hopefully the ACT before Christmas, which will be wonderful news for the 660,000 people that work in our tourism industry.
Well, what's the long-term plan there? Because from December 1, New South Wales is essentially doing away with its vaccine mandates. People will have equal access, vaccinated and unvaccinated. Where do we stand as far as international tourists go? At what point will we welcome international tourists who are not vaccinated?
Well, we'll obviously work with the states and territories according to the national plan on that. In the first instance, it'll be those who are doubly vaccinated who will be able to come, and then we'll work on it to see what we do with regard to those who aren't vaccinated. Obviously, they will, in the first instance, need to do a 2-week quarantine period. But as states and territories work with the Commonwealth, obviously we'll assess that and we'll seek to ensure that we're doing everything we can, ultimately over time, to welcome all tourists back, because that's what we want. We want to be open again and ensuring we're welcoming everyone back to this country. But that'll be done with step by step with states and territory governments. But very much in the first instance, it's going to be those who are doubly vaccinated.
Minister Tehan, you have warned that Australian farmers and miners will be slapped with carbon border taxes if Australia doesn't commit to a net zero emissions target by 2050. Why don't your coalition colleagues in the National Party get that?
Well, I've had a lot of discussions with my colleagues in the National Party and within the Liberal Party, and I think there is an understanding of the dangers of protectionist forces using the discussion around net zero to put tariffs up and to drive protectionism even further as we come out of this pandemic. Now, you always in political parties get differing views on issues, so not everyone is convinced of that, but I think the majority of our party room, the coalition party room, understands there is a need for us to get to net zero by 2050, and in particular of the dangers that protectionist forces will come to the fore if we don't achieve that, and we'll try and use that to harm our exports, which obviously isn't in our national interest.
Now, I know you've also just returned from a 2-week trip in Europe, working hard. Is it correct that you had several high-level meetings with the French cancelled?
It is. Obviously, I wanted to meet with the French Trade Minister, and I was going to meet with their top business group. Now, both those meetings couldn't take place. I was able to exchange pleasantries and shake hands with the French Trade Minister on the margins of the G20 meeting in Italy, and we said we look forward to being able to catch up properly when circumstances allowed. But it's a difficult time in our relationship with France at the moment. Obviously, we took a decision with regards to AUKUS, which was in our national interest. That was a tough decision, but you've got to take tough decisions when the national interest is at stake, and we'll continue to work through that with the French. But when I was in France a couple of weeks ago, obviously there wasn't the circumstances that enabled me to sit down with my French counterpart. But I hope over time that I'll be able to do that.
But Minister, how long will this tantrum from the French continue? They've already re-established a relationship with the US. They seem to have forgiven and forgotten there. But with Australia, how much longer are we expected to be frozen out like this?
Look, I think it might take some time. There's obviously grave disappointment on their side. But, you know, the most important thing from an Australian point of view is that we just keep explaining the reasons why we did this, that, you know, we've got a very changed geostrategic circumstance in the Indo-Pacific. We took a decision that was very much in our national interest. It now gives us access to nuclear-powered submarines, very sophisticated missile technology, AI, cyber technology that will enable us to provide security for our people. And ultimately, in the end, you have to put the security of your people first. So we'll keep explaining that, but it could take some time for us to be able to get things back on a level playing field with the French.
I also understand that Australia and the UK are on the brink of a new free trade deal. I think it'll be free in quite extreme terms, probably only matched by the arrangements that exist between Australia and New Zealand. In practical terms, what will this deal mean for Australians?
Well, in practical terms, what it means is greater diversification of where we can send our goods and services. It also means that people will be able to move between the UK and Australia much more freely, especially young Australians under the age of 35. For our farmers, for instance, the market for the UK has been closed for sheep meat for the last 50 years, so we'll be able to provide lamb roasts, lamb chops into the UK market, and that's fantastic access for us. On beef, we'll be able to do the same. Sugar, we'll be able to do the same. When I was in London, I visited Tate & Lyle, the biggest manufacturer of sugar in the UK, and once the agreement is inked and into force, we were able to see where the boats will be able to come with Australian sugar direct from Queensland or northern New South Wales up the Thames, dock at this processing facility that Tate & Lyle have in London, and will be made into sugar for the UK market. Now, that's something that we haven't been able to do for 50 years. They had posters on the wall for when the UK went in the EU of the workers then striking, saying that they wanted to continue getting Australian sugar, not French sugar, would you believe it or not? So this will be groundbreaking in what it does, and will be wonderful for jobs, for the whole economic relationship with the UK. It will also facilitate greater investment. When I was there also, that we announced, and were there when it was publicly announced, that an Australian company which has won the contract and will invest £1 billion in putting 4G and 5G into the London Underground, both underground and above. So it will also facilitate investment like that. So it's a wonderful, wonderful agreement, adds to our trade diversification, and I think will really strengthen the relationship that we have with the UK, which is really important at this time.